Good morning and welcome to the Roadmap MBA. My name is Ashleigh King and I'm really excited to be presenting today and chatting to you. So today I'm going to be talking about podcasting and its place in the marketing mix. And I'll be sharing a little bit about why I love podcasting, what you can get out of it, how it can help you reach new customers, how it can help you raise awareness of your company or brand or anything else you want to raise awareness of. It might be an important social issue that matters to you. So before I do all of that, I just wanted to say hi to anyone who hasn't met me before. You can also leave comments. I'd love to hear your questions and help you with anything you want to know about podcasting. So my name is Ashleigh King. I call myself a podcaster and creative entrepreneur, and I really like to say creative because that's really important to me. So I have a podcasting studio called Flamingo Heights, which is in the Ousbourne Valley, a very creative area of the Northeast. And it has different rooms with different functions, but we have a podcast recording space. We also record voiceovers, training, live streams. People hire it sometimes if they're out of town and they need a space that they know that there's going to be great Wi-Fi, brilliant sound, and they won't have to worry about any dodgy equipment in their hotel. So it's going really well. I'm really enjoying it, and a lot of what I talk about on this show for Steve Pugh is my experience of running a business as a female entrepreneur who happens to be neurodivergent. And you will hear me also talk about podcasting a lot because that is what I do every day. I get paid to chat, which I love. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about podcasting and why I think you should know about it, but also its place in the marketing mix. So first of all, some people don't know what a podcast is, so I will share with you. So a podcast is a piece of content that you can listen to and access anywhere. You can download them to listen to. It's like a piece of radio content. Sometimes it can be audio only. Sometimes it can be audio and video. And what a lot of people and a lot of clients that I work with don't realize is that if you have content already, if you have a Facebook group and you are running a business and you are going live every week to your coaching clients or people you're working with, or teaching them how to do something, or even Instagram lives, you could start a podcast from some of that backdated archive material. So there's a lot that you can do with content you already have. I'm going to be talking today a little bit about the marketing funnel, why podcasting matters, and also some of the macro factors that you should know around podcasting, because when I looked into podcasting in my business plan, I did quite a significant amount of market research and looked into why podcasting can give you such a competitive advantage. So whether you have a business or whether you're just interested in podcasting, I'm here today to chat to you and tell you a little bit about it all. So the first thing I'd like to share is a little bit about the marketing funnel, which is called AIDA, AIDA. You've got it here on the screen. So if we look here at this funnel, it's a very crudely drawn picture, but you'll see that you've got four things. You've got awareness, interest, desire, and action. Now, one of the things I wanted to point out is this is a marketing funnel that it's been, when you look into the theory of it, people have said that it could have been used for around 3 centuries. It's been developed in much more detail. Nowadays, there are things that are added to it like ambassadors or loyal supporters. There's things like consideration. There's all kinds of new steps, especially as we have more and more technology at our hands and fingertips. However, today, to keep it simple, because we've got learners and listeners from all walks of life, I'm just going to talk about it in this very simplistic framework. So we have, first of all, awareness. So if you're going to start a podcast, what is the value of this model? Well, if someone's listening to you and they don't know who you are, they've never heard of you before, what you can do is you can actually raise awareness of your product, service, or a social issue that's important to you. Now, it is important to find the right listeners, but this is where you will have potentially lots of new people, new faces who might come across you, who've never heard of you before, and you're raising awareness of yourself and your brand. The next bit is interest. So people will move through from just being aware that you're doing something. So an example might be, today I'm talking to you on the Roadmap MBA. I'm guest presenting for my colleague Steve Pugh, who runs the Roadmap MBA. However, there will be people and listeners on his channel who've never heard of me or my podcast, Nurture Your Zest. So they will become aware of me. So at this point, they have an awareness. Now, if anyone listening hasn't heard of me, what you might find is you've just heard that I have a podcast called Nurture Your Zest. So what might happen is you then have an interest, which takes you to the next step in the funnel. So you may desire to, with that interest, you might then think, well, I don't know who this girl is. I don't know what she's talking about. So I'd like to actually go and find out a little bit more. What makes her credible to be a podcaster? What makes her credible to have her own space? So you may then have that interest to go and find out more. Now, when you go through that next step, you then might have a desire to look at my website, look at my YouTube portfolio or my back catalogue of episodes. You might wonder, well, what is it that makes this person think they know what they're doing? And you can apply this to anything. I'm just using me as an example. So you might then desire to find out more about podcasting. So you might want to send me a message on LinkedIn or something like that, or drop a comment today. So your desire might be to ask a question, which please do. If you've got any questions, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And then you may be inclined to take an action. So your action would be potentially send me an email, ask a question. It might be that you go on YouTube and look up how to start a podcast, or it might be that you do something else. But this is a really great tool. Now, we've talked a little bit about you as an audience, but if you were a podcaster, how does that apply to your potential customers? If you were thinking of starting a podcast, why should that matter? Why is that important? So this is where you can raise awareness of your product or service. You can gain the interest in more depth. You can teach your customer or client about something that maybe they need to learn a little bit about, or you're educating them, you're engaging them, you're entertaining them. So you're just helping them to learn more about you and what you're doing. It's all about value. It's all about helping and supporting. And then potentially there may be a desire to work with you or to ask questions in which you're able to serve your audience. And then they may choose to take an action. So this is a very simple framework, but I just wanted to point that out. So in terms of podcasting and its place in the marketing mix, there are many ways that businesses use marketing to reach potential customers, and you'll hear that and go through marketing in any MBA program or any business course. So there are ways that you can contact people through social media. Sorry, I said contact. What I mean is connect with people. You can do that through websites. You can do that through direct mail, so postcards, leaflets. You can do it through flyers. You could do it through networking and one-to-one events. However, podcasting is a unique way to connect with people, in my opinion, because they are listening to you when they are in their own private space at their own convenience. So if someone's not able to sleep at night, you can't go networking with them. It's not appropriate. You know, everyone has their own family lives and things to do. And if you were networking with someone and talking to them, it's kind of rude to chat to them while you're doing something else. But if you were washing your dishes, you can listen to a podcast. If you're driving a long drive to Aberdeen, or, you know, from one area of one region to another, and it's going to take you a long time, having those ways to connect with people can be really helpful because they're listening to you in their own space. So I would say that podcasting is actually creates a way for businesses and individuals to connect with their audiences in such a unique way. And again, when we talk about its place in the marketing mix, if you look at standard marketing practices, you've got ways like raising awareness, as we said, leaflet drops, websites, things like this, but actually getting people to that stage where they're aware of you, they know you have a podcast, they know what they're doing, will actually help to build that interest. So they may go on your website and then they may take an action like book a call with you or send you an inquiry. So it can be really useful as just a starting point to connect with people in a very a natural way, which is nice. I think as well with podcasting, it's fun. You can talk about anything. So I work with clients who are talking about their why cults have a lot to do with modern HR and human resources in organizations. And I was a little bit curious about that when I started working with that client, but actually they made some really good points, and that was their viewpoint. You can work with people on, social justice matters that really matter to them. I'm working with a brilliant person on race and recipes and how they can explore food, but also different stories and different people's experiences of racism, and really open up the discussion but through food, which I think is an incredible idea. My podcast is all about overcoming adversity, the prickly situations in life, and it's called Nurture Your Zest. And in that podcast, we talk about courage, creativity, curiosity, and how you can find inspiration to nurture your zest. So in those podcasts, I talk to people mainly in the tech sector or creative industries, or people who have inspirational stories. And that's my focus, but you might have a focus on something else. So it's a great way to educate your audience. One of the people I'm working with is in floristry, and she does wedding planning and flowers, but she works with businesses to become more business savvy. So she teaches some of her florists how to, start being more productive, being more lean. You'll hear that term a lot with me when I'm talking, but also in MBA or business modules and things. So to be more process and orientated and efficient. So there's so many things that you can talk about on a podcast, and that's why I love it. And I also wanted to point out some of the macro bits around podcasting. So if you've seen me talk before, you'll have heard me talk about PESTEL, so political, economic, social, technological, environmental and legal factors. And I'm actually going to write that because there's a couple that I wanted to point out that I think are really relevant to podcasting. Okay, so some people write them one way, some people write it the other, but this is the way that I'm going to write it today. So first of all, political. So what could be a political issue around podcasting? Well, freedom of speech is a huge one. So I don't want to get too political, but we know that there is conflict at the moment in Russia and in Ukraine. And before that conflict came out, in recent years, there has been a lot of I'm trying to think of the correct term, protection of free speech, so around journalists and what they're able to say, and that has affected podcasting. Also, in terms of podcasting, you have people who will have a viewpoint on the far right and on the far left and all the way in the middle. So it's a really important factor that, although you can talk about anything and you can find people in your own audience and niche, remember that it is important to be values focused and think about what matters to you and try to honor that, because that will help you with anything that starts to feel murky. So with political, we have freedom of speech. And I would say versus censorship. And we have far right and left. So those are some key things that I picked up when I was looking into podcasting. In terms of economic, actually, when you look at the barriers to entry in terms of podcasting and you look at competitive advantage, there isn't much risk to starting a podcast in terms of the economics. So it's very cheap to start. It's really up to you or your business or whatever you might want to do with a podcast. I would say it depends on the reasons you want to start one, but actually the entry barrier in terms of economics is very low. You don't need to spend a lot of money. You could start today. If you have a smartphone, you could just record yourself doing voice memos and upload that to a distribution site or something like SoundCloud, and you could be good to go. And many of these sites will allow you to have a free amount of distribution hours. So really, you can do it for free. If you wanted to take it a step further, you could do recording yourself on Zoom, whether that's audio only or video only, and again, put it on a distribution site. Now, even something like YouTube is free to put up your own videos or comments. So whether content, if you're putting up audio and video, YouTube's a great place, but I still put my podcasts up, some of my audio only ones, on YouTube, and they get listens every week. So I would say you can still put content up on YouTube without video if you want to. So those are some great free ways to get involved. And so that's why I would say, from an economic point of view, it's really easy to get into podcasting. At the same time, if you want to stand out in quite a busy market, so lots of people will ask me, Ashleigh, do you think that it's too early to start a podcast? As in, well, is it too late rather? Is the market too saturated? And I would say yes, there are a lot of podcasts. And if you're just going to put a podcast online and it's a well-being podcast and it's a generic podcast, then yeah, maybe that won't reach that many people. But the fact is, people will listen to you because it's you, or they'll listen to your business because it's your business. And that's why I believe that having values around your podcast and working on what you're bringing to your listeners is going to make a massive difference, because people will connect with you and it will bring your ideal clients to you. So, like I said, the economics around starting a podcast are actually, it's a very low barrier to entry. However, it is a massively competitive in terms of your other listeners. So I'm going to put those notes for you here. So there's a low barrier to entry from a price point, but high competition. And so you can stand out by having your own USP or USV, which I'm saying for unique set of values. Okay, so in terms of social, this is a really important one. So we talked about a little bit about far right and left, but in terms of the conversations you can really connect with people. You can make a platform, you can move the discussion on really important social matters. So for instance, in my own podcast, I've been surprised by some of the topics that have come up. I'm just thinking, I don't know what flags up in the algorithm for YouTube as offensive, so I won't say some of them, but what I do know is we've talked about, difficult situations that many families go through. We've talked about things like neurodivergence, having long-term illnesses and trying to cope with that, trying to manage a complex work-life balance or other challenges that life throw at you, grieving, going through losing a loved one, losing a relationship, losing your sense of self. So I'm really proud that actually the podcast I've personally created has touched so many people all over the world. I have listeners in Finland, in Uganda, in Alaska and Trinidad, and I look at my stats sometimes and I think, why have they heard of this, and how have they heard of this, and what makes them want to listen to a South African girl living in Newcastle? But there's something about me that they connect with, and that's really lovely. And there'll be something about you, if you want to start a podcast, that they'll want to connect with you. So from a social point of view, it really connects us globally, and it's opened up the world for many conversations that maybe we weren't having. I've learned so much about other cultures. A simple example is when I did a podcast for World AIDS Day, I spoke to somebody about AIDS and some of the challenges that people who have AIDS may experience, the stigma around AIDS. And what I found is that I had such a different viewpoint, because I grew up in South Africa and AIDS is not uncommon. There are many charities that I was personally involved with as a young child, helping mothers and babies, helping mothers to learn how to wash their babies, and helping many children who were orphans because of AIDS and things like this. Whereas in the UK, there was a totally different viewpoint with my guest, because we were talking more about the LGBT culture and subcultures and how much of a huge impact it had on the UK social structure in the 80s, as well as the States and other areas. So I would say that we will all have such a different perspective, but podcasting gives you that opportunity to have these discussions in a way that feels meaningful and safe in lots of ways. So I'm going to put here, social gives us a global platform. But also a sense of connectedness, which I think is really important. A word of warning on that front, I'm working with a client at the moment and we are doing some great series. We're doing 8 episodes. We're going to be working on different topics that are important to them, that they want to highlight and raise the visibility of. And we talked yesterday about what would be okay and what would not be okay in terms of titles and themes. So we were going through the curation process. I would say if you're going to start a podcast, don't just start one. I mean, it's always good to start something and not be too afraid. So I don't want to scare you in that way. What I'm trying to say is, even if all you do is take half an hour to set a timer, sit down and write down all your ideas, and then see as you go through, are there any common themes? Because what I see happen is people get really excited about starting a podcast and then they get bored because it's hard. You know, there may be things you need to do, like edit it. There may be things like maybe one day you wanted to talk about something, let's think fast fashion and why fast fashion is a problem and how it impacts the environment. But then another day you want to talk about your favorite colors in the rainbow. It doesn't really have a through line. And for those who may know me on this channel already, I have previous experience of organizing the TEDx Newcastle University conference. And what I learned from TEDx and TED is that curation is really important. There's something we say a lot in TEDx and in the TEDx community called a through line. And it's basically that anything you do, any content you produce, any podcasts you produce, any speaking that you produce or any speech you write should have a through line. So you should have something or some things that are themes that you will use over and over again. So if you are creating a series or something like that about social issues or social matters, it doesn't mean that you can't talk about anything and everything, but it means there should be some sense of format and consistency, because that really helps your audience. It helps the people who are coming on your show and might prepare by listening to some of your previous episodes, but it also helps you to connect with people because they know what to expect. It makes them feel safe when they listen to you. So another thing about the social matters is just be mindful, if you are a business, that if you are going to take a stance on something, it's very hard nowadays to have a view that is completely neutral. So it's just worth thinking about, where your line is, the kind of issues you may get if you put out a podcast on a particular topic, and what your potential answers might be to that. So I had somebody say this to me the other day where they were thinking, well, actually, I might do something about women in business. And I was like, great, I do lots of things about women in business. And then a colleague said, well, actually, that might be quite controversial. And that was so interesting because I'd never heard that viewpoint, because I am a woman who happens to be in business. But there are other people who will share a different opinion to me. And their view was that if you do something on women in business, doesn't that mean that men in business aren't important? And that's a really important matter and topic to say, because I think for me, actually, I'm really concerned about men and, men's mental health and well-being. So I was able to have this wonderful conversation with a colleague and talk about where the boundaries were on the women in business content that I might want to create. And actually some of the themes that I may or may not want to talk about, some of the questions I might get and how I might answer them. So I think it's really important just to touch on that social matter, that if you're going to talk about hot topics or difficult things like that, you should really, really think about what you feel comfortable saying and what you want to say. Okay, so in terms of technology, the biggest thing with technology is that with podcasting, you can go anywhere in the world, which I love that. So you can really connect with people. But this comes back to a social point. So in terms of your technology, the moment there is a war, as we know, with Russia and Ukraine, what I found really interesting is Patreon, which is a company that many podcasters use to gain memberships or sponsorship. Patreon have recently stopped. Well, I don't. That you can't send money via Patreon at the moment. There's a block on certain things. So remember that with technology and big global issues, there could be things like that are completely out of your control. So if you are completely reliant on getting monetized donations and things like this through one platform, it might be worth thinking about other things. I'm not going to go into that too much because we're just looking at podcasting very light touch and in a very simple way today. But there are technology issues to think about. So when you do a podcast, where will you put it? Where's it going to live? You know, it will, there's so many, as we know, we're all in the cloud now. We're all up in the air somewhere online in so many different places. But are you just going to do it on YouTube? Are you going to do it on SoundCloud? Give your podcasts a home, and also remember to check up on them. So one of the things that I found is in the past, I've disappeared off Spreaker, and Spreaker is one of the biggest places that I find new listeners, and rather they find me. But I hadn't realized until one of my audience members and regular listeners said, hey, I can't find you on Spreaker anymore. And it was a simple thing, like they changed their terms and conditions and I hadn't noticed and I hadn't opted back in. So please, if you're going to use any technology to do with podcasting, make sure you keep on top of it and you have a look at what's going on. So that's really important. And then from an environmental standpoint, I just wanted to cover this because I think it's really cool. So if you think of all the ways that you might market your business, your products, or even yourself, you might have business cards, you might have things like, leaflets we spoke about before, you might travel far to connect with someone, reach someone, network with someone. The great thing about podcasting is that you can talk to someone, you can have a guest interview, you can talk to someone in another country via live stream or something like that. You could have someone into your business space and showcase your facilities. You could do what I'm doing today, which is not quite podcasting, but feels like it, which is in somebody's studio live presenting. And how cool is that? So the thing about environmental is there's actually a lot less cost to the planet through doing a podcast than traditional marketing methods. You're able to reach so many people in many ways, in quite cheap and inexpensive ways, but in a way that really connects with them and in a way that people really value. So I would say that the environmental concerns around podcasting, it's actually really limited. The only thing I will say is, like anything, delete files you don't need. If you've edited stuff and you don't want that raw material anymore, just don't let it take up space, and that's always good to save data and things like that. However, I also am someone who believes you should always use what you have. So if you've got bloopers, if you've got funny things you've said or done, use them. It's so good. It makes brilliant marketing material as well. So yeah, they are easy to distribute, no paper, and they don't take up space. So it's not like having, lots of leaflets and things like that, but you reach so many people. And then finally, the legal, and it's not one to be avoided. So there are lots of really successful podcasters, and those who have been very successful often will take a bit of a radical stance on things. So there's people that, if you want to think of, people often talk about Joe Rogan or all kinds of big speakers, and they might take a particular viewpoint or particular stance. Jordan Peterson is a very controversial podcaster and a speaker rather, and will speak on many topics. But he's got some really interesting things to say. I don't always agree with them, but I find them, helpful to listen to. And what I was going to say is, remember that with some things, what you say can come back to bite you. So it's not just talking about people, it can be talking about things and facts that you don't know the truth on. You see this a lot with crime and conspiracies. It's important that if you're ever going to go down that route, that you use your own opinion and freedom of speech. But remember that you may be broadcasting from somewhere where the laws might be different, or you might be speaking to someone in a country where the laws are different. So please be mindful of that, because that's something that I found really interesting when I looked into podcasting myself, is defamation, freedom of speech, but also just reputationally. You want to protect your reputation and that of your clients and other people. So a question I had recently was from a coach and consultant, actually, who was working with a company, a corporate client, and wanted to turn a lot of the transcripts and audio conversations that they had and some of the material they had into podcast content. However, the question was, where does that intellectual property live? Does it live with the company that they produced and been commissioned and hired to do things for, or does it live with them? So there are sometimes things to explore like that, and I just wanted to flag it to you because I think it's important. So I'm just going to write here intellectual property. We also have defamation and reputation. So those are some of the things that I thought were really important when I looked at some of those factors, and I think that's helpful to know. So I wanted to tell you a little bit more about podcasting from my point of view in terms of what it's done for me. So lots of people will say to me, I wear this hat all the time. It's my pink hat, and they love it. And I actually haven't been wearing it for very long. I've only had it on for since July last year. So it's not something I've worn very often, but it's something that I started to use in my podcast as well. And when I go networking and when I'm guest presenting like today, and it's become part of me and part of my personal brand. But what's happened now is I go to events and I get called Pod Girl, or I get, oh, you must know Ashleigh, she has the pink hat. And so it's not something that I ever expected, but it's been really helpful. And so podcasting can really help you to grow your personal brand. But I always like to say to people and help manage expectations that you're not necessarily going to make money because you have a podcast. In fact, Ian Farrar, who is a podcaster, he has the Far North podcast. Sorry, he has the Industry Angel Business podcast, but has a business called Far North. But Ian Farrar has told me in interviews before that actually you don't make money because you have a podcast or because of your podcast. It's because you have one, because of the people around you, the people you interview, the conversations you have, the way you build trust with your audience. It's taking them on a journey with you. And so what I would say is, I haven't necessarily made money from my podcast directly, but indirectly, of course I have. I'm in a brilliant position now where people might invite me to speak on a panel or at an event, and that's a paid opportunity, whereas in the past I might have done that for exposure or, with the hope of getting an opportunity. Podcasting can be brilliant in terms of helping you to work out who your ideal audience is, because you're going to go through a lot of exercises like that to think who will listen, who do you want to connect with, all of these different things. So I would say that podcasting is a great way to really connect with people. I want to share as well, for anyone who might be scared or think, well, how is it going to help me? So I started podcasting in 2019. I had no idea what I was doing. I just had featured on somebody else's show, and I got some feedback that I had an interesting and unusual accent, and they wanted to hear more of it. So I decided to give it a go and just try a few episodes. But what I did was I chatted to people that really interested me and inspired me, and then I shared those conversations, and those conversations had so many people start to listen and all over the world, and they started to feel inspired and they started to share their stories with me. So what I want to say is I had no experience. I did work with a professional studio. I found myself a sponsor, Tim Lazinski from TL Multimedia, who's been tremendously supportive of me, as well as Paul Scurra of That Branding Company and Blind Sea Photo. But however, having those sponsors really helped to give me the opportunity to go and record a podcast that was really high quality. So it meant that right from the beginning, I was able to step into the shoes of what I wanted to do already. And I think that's a really important thing to think about. When you tell people and friends and family you're going to start a podcast, they might not get it. They might think, well, why? Isn't there already enough podcasts? So talk to people who you feel will inspire you or who have already been through the journey. So for anyone who lives in the northeast of England, I have free podcasting courses that are funded that you can access through the local business and intellectual property centre at Newcastle. But we also have ones upcoming in Morpeth and in South Shields, Sunderland and Hexham. So if you drop me a message, we will be able to chat about what dates those are happening. But I think it's really important to try and learn from someone who's already been in your shoes. It's also important to remember you can start with what you already have, but a little bit of planning will really help you to connect with the people you want to connect with, so that you don't fall off at the 6th episode kind of plateau that many people do, and so that you get actual real results from what you're doing. So that's all I wanted to say on podcasting for today. If anyone wants to reach out, you can find me at Nurture Your Zest. I have a YouTube channel as well called Nurture Your Zest. I'm on Facebook. I'm mostly on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you. There are different ways you can work with me, and I'm mainly working with businesses at the moment to help them create short episodes, so about 8, 12 or 6 episodes for a season, and that helps them to showcase their research and raise awareness of their businesses. But I also work with some people one-to-one, especially on their confidence blocks around public speaking and why anyone would want to listen to them, because a lot of people have fears around their voice and hearing their voice back, and it's so interesting the things we carry with us. So that's all I wanted to say for today. It's always nice to be here on a Tuesday morning. I will be back. I'm doing this every fortnight, so I'll see you in 2 weeks. I'm still thinking about what I might share in that time. I think I'm probably going to talk about TEDx, my journey with TEDx, why I love it so much, and what I learned from being the executive producer of an online conference during lockdown 2020 and 2021, and I think that should be quite interesting. I'll also include some tips on how to be a TEDx speaker, because I get those questions all the time, so I figured it's good to make some content that I can point people towards. So thank you so much for listening, and I hopefully will see you again soon.